You have just killed a man in front of witnesses, and in Iceland in the year 980, there is no police force to arrest you, no prison to hold you, no king, no executioner. You will walk free, but do one small thing wrong in the next few hours, one single thing, and this same society will erase you so completely that you will come to envy the man lying in the grass at your feet, because the Norse world was not lawless. It was one of the most obsessively legal societies in medieval Europe. It simply had none of the machinery you assume law requires, no police, no prisons, no lawyers, no judges, and for most of its life, not one word of it written down. So stay with this. By the end, you will understand a system of justice that ran on nothing but memory, silver, and the unbearable weight of being known. Let me set you down properly. The year is around 980, and you live in Iceland, an island settled barely a century ago by Norse families who sailed west out of Norway looking for land, and very often looking to get away from a king. That last part matters more than anything else you will hear today. These people did not flee to the edge of the world to build another kingdom. There is no king here, no capital, no army, no tax collector, no central authority of any kind. What there is instead, spread across the island, are roughly 39 chieftains, the men called Gothar, and every free farmer chooses which one to follow. He is not your lord. If he fails you, you leave him and attach yourself to another, and he loses standing every time it happens. Power here has to be earned again and again, and it can drain away in a season. So how does a place like that settle an argument? Once a year, in June, when the light never fully leaves the sky, you ride. Everyone rides. From every corner of the island, across lava fields and glacial rivers, families and chieftains and traders converge on a rift valley of black rock and water where the land itself is split open. Thingvellir, the plains of the assembly, and there, in the open air, under nothing but sky, you hold the Althing. It first met in the year 930, which makes it one of the oldest parliaments on earth, and it has no building because it does not need one. For 2 weeks the valley fills. People throw up temporary shelters called búðir, low walls of turf and stone roofed with stretched woolen cloth. Merchants set up, marriages are arranged, young men look for wives and old men for allies. It is a court, a market and a festival at once, and somewhere in that crowd your killing will be settled. At the heart of it stands a rock, the Lugberg, the Law Rock, a shelf of stone where the cliff wall behind throws the voice back across the valley, so that one man speaking with no instrument but his own lungs can be heard by thousands. Any free man may climb it and speak, but one man climbs it by right, and his job is the strangest in the Norse world. He is the Lögsögumaður, the law speaker, and you need to understand exactly what that title means, because it is not a metaphor. The law of Iceland is not in a book. There is no book. The law exists only inside this one man's head. He has memorized it, all of it. Every procedure, every deadline, every category of offence, every tariff of compensation, the whole legal system of a country, held in living human memory. He is elected for 3 years, and each summer he climbs that rock and recites 1/3 of the law aloud, from memory to the assembled nation. 3 summers, 3/3, and the country has heard the whole of its own law spoken to it. Then it begins again. He is the only official in Iceland who draws a regular payment, and looking at the job, you can see why. Get a clause wrong, and you have not made an error. You have changed the law. Sit with that a moment. A society where the Constitution is a performance, where the law survives only as long as someone can still say it out loud. And here is the detail that lands hardest. It stayed that way for nearly 2 centuries. Icelandic law was not written down until the winter of 1117 into 1118, when the assembly finally decided to commit it to parchment at the farm of a man named Haflín Marsson. The law code we read today, the one scholars call Gragas, the grey goose, comes from that moment. Everything before it, the entire Viking Age, ran on memory alone. So, back to your dead man. You are standing over him. What actually happens? You get a bill. In the Norse world, a human life had a price, an actual number, and the system's first instinct was not to punish you, but to make you pay. The word for it is wergild, the man price. Gragas gives it a whole section with a wonderfully literal name, Baugetal, the ring count, because before minted coin, silver was carried as rings and cut apart by weight. It is a tariff. It lays out who pays and who receives, ring by ring, outward through cousins and second cousins, spreading the debt across whole kin networks. And the sum is not the same for everyone. Kill a chieftain and the figure is ruinous. Kill a nobody and it is manageable. The law does not pretend all men are equal. It writes the inequality down and prices it. Cold, yes. It was also the most civilized thing in the system, because the alternative was the feud. Your family kills mine kills yours, for generations, until both are hollowed out. Wergild is the off-ramp. Name a number, take the silver, let it stop. Every payment made was a war that did not happen, which brings us to the thing that will rearrange how you see these people. Killing a man was survivable, hiding it was not. That is the hinge the whole Norse legal world turns on, and it is almost the exact opposite of how we think. Old Norse has two separate words where English has a blur. Vig is a killing done openly. Morð is a killing done in secret, and the entire moral weight sits on that difference. Under the law you had a duty, immediately, to announce what you had done. You declared it at the nearest farm you came to, out loud, to whoever was there. The Norwegian laws are explicit about the window. Confess at the first house, or the third at the latest, and the deed is a vig. Terrible, expensive, but ordinary. It goes to the assembly, it gets priced. Silver changes hands and life goes on. Say nothing, and the same act becomes something else entirely. It becomes morð, and the man who does it earns a word that carries real horror in the sources, mordvagra, murder wolf. He is not a criminal to be fined. He is placed, in the old phrasing, outside the pale of the law, and the community's response is not a bill, it is removal. Read that again, because it inverts everything. The Norse did not primarily condemn you for taking a life. They condemned you for taking a life and denying the community its right to know. An open killing, however brutal, left the system intact. A victim, a killer, a price, a settlement. A hidden killing left a corpse and a lie made law impossible. It meant the dead man's kin had no one to sue, no one to price, no one to forgive. In a world with no detectives and no investigation, the only thing standing between order and permanent blood feud was that a man told the truth about what he had done. Concealment was not a lesser sin than murder. Concealment was the murder. And before you file that away as something alien, notice that you already believe it. You have heard it your whole life in a phrase people repeat without thinking. It is never the crime, it is the cover-up. The politician survives the scandal and is destroyed by the denial. The company weathers the fault and is ruined by the memo showing it knew. We forgive the deed, and we do not forgive the hiding, and we have never quite been able to say why. The Norse could say why. They had worked out, 1,000 years ago, and with no lawyers to help them, that a group can absorb almost any injury as long as it can see the injury. What it cannot survive is not knowing. That instinct in you, the one that flares hotter at the lie than at the thing lied about, is not modern at all. It is theirs, you inherited it, and sometimes the assembly could not settle it at all. Sometimes two men simply would not be priced. For that, there was the Holmganga. The word means, roughly, island going, and that is close to what it was, a formal, legal duel fought inside a marked-out ground. The boundary was staked with hazel poles, and often the fighters stood on a stretched-out cloak, a small island you could not leave. The rules were fussy in a way that tells you this was law and not brawling. Each man got a set number of shields, usually 3, and when they were hacked apart, they were gone. The challenged man struck first, then the other, turn by turn, in order, like a grim conversation. First blood was often enough to end it, and the winner walked away 3 marks of silver richer. It was not chaos, it was litigation with edges, and it rotted, exactly as you would expect. If you were strong, the duel stopped being a last resort and became a business. Professional duelists appeared, men who would find a farmer with good land or a beautiful daughter, manufacture an insult, demand the Holmganga, and take everything when he declined or died. The release valve became a weapon for bullies, so Iceland did something remarkable for a supposedly savage culture. It looked at one of its own traditions, decided it was doing more harm than good, and abolished it. Holmganga was banned in Iceland in 1006, after a famous duel between the poet Gunnlaugur Serpent Tongue and his rival Hram settled nothing at all. Norway followed in 1014. A society with no police outlawed its own trial by combat, by talking about it and then voting. But you have been waiting for the real punishment, and here it is. Because if silver would not fix it, and a duel would not fix it, the assembly reached for the only weapon it had. Not a cell, not a rope, a word, outlaw. And there were two grades. The lighter one was Fjörbauksgardre, and the name is beautiful and awful at once. It comes from the life ring, the payment you made to buy your way out. It meant 3 years gone. You left the country, but you kept your property, and the law granted you 3 places of sanctuary where you could not be touched while you arranged passage. Serve the 3 years, come back, and you are a man again. The heavier one was Skogungr. It means, literally, going to the forest, and a man under it was a Skogumr, a forest man. This was not exile, this was deletion. Your property was confiscated, your marriage dissolved, you were removed from the law's protection entirely, and this is the part people miss. That did not just mean the law would not help you, it meant the law would not punish anyone who hurt you. Any man on the island could kill you at any time, for any reason, and it was not a crime. There was no charge to bring, because you were no longer legally a person to whom crime could be done. It was a death sentence with no set date, carried out by whoever felt like it, and it went further. It became a crime to feed you, to shelter you, to help you. Everyone you had ever loved was now breaking the law by handing you bread. And this, right here, is where I want you to stop and actually feel it, because it is the closest this 1,000-year-old system will ever get to touching your life. You already know this punishment. You have felt a small version of it. The silence when you walk into a room, the group that stops replying, being the one nobody wants to be seen next to. Every human being carries a quiet, animal terror of being cut out of the group, and it is not weakness, it is ancient wiring, because for almost all of our history, alone meant dead. The Norse did not need a prison. They understood something we have half forgotten in our world of locks and walls, that the worst thing you can do to a person is not to cage him, it is to make him nothing, to let him walk free across an entire island and be unable to speak to a single soul on it. And there was a second cruelty folded inside the first. An outlaw was not only unprotected, he was unavenged. If someone killed you, no one could bring a case and no one could collect a price, which meant that in a culture where a man's kin were obliged to answer for his death, your death would be answered by nobody. You would simply stop and the world would close over the gap without a ripple. For a people who cared enormously about a name outlasting the body, that was the deepest cut of all. Not death. Death was ordinary here. Death that no one was required to notice. And we know what that did to men, because we have their stories, and the sagas are almost obsessed with them. Gisli Sorsson lasted 13 years as an outlaw, hunted across the country, kept alive largely by a wife who broke the law to do it. Grettir Asmundason lasted 19 years hiding in the Icelandic wilderness, in the wind and the dark, sleeping rough, always watched, always worth killing to anyone who fancied the reputation. He is remembered as the strongest man in Iceland, and here is the thing about his saga. It is not really about strength at all. It is about a man who became afraid of the dark, who could not bear to be alone, and was sentenced to be exactly that, for 19 years, until it finally killed him. The greatest outlaw story these people ever told is not an adventure. It is a story about loneliness, told by a society that understood loneliness better than we do. But outlawry could cut the other way, and the most famous case in Norse history is the proof. Around the year 982, a hot-tempered man named Eric the Red fell into a lethal quarrel with a neighbour called Thorgest. Men died. The local assembly, the Thorsnes thing, gave Eric the lesser sentence, 3 years out. An ordinary man serves that in Norway. Eric had already been thrown out of Norway, so he loaded a ship, pointed it west into open ocean toward land nobody had settled, and spent his entire sentence exploring it. When his time was served, he sailed home with a name he had chosen like a salesman, Greenland. In 985 he led 25 ships out to colonize it. Only 14 arrived. But a Norse society lived on Greenland for nearly 500 years, and Eric's son Leif would push further west and step onto North America around the year 1000, 5 centuries before Columbus. All of it downstream of a 3-year sentence handed out by farmers standing in a field. So look at what these people actually built. No police, no prisons, no king, no written law, and a court with no power whatsoever to enforce its own verdicts. The Althing could find you guilty and then do precisely nothing about it. Enforcement was left to the injured family, and yet it held for 300 years because everyone had agreed on one fragile idea, that the words spoken at that rock were real, that a verdict meant something even with nobody to enforce it. That is not barbarism, That is a very high-functioning kind of trust, which makes the picture in your head worth one last look. The horned helmet the Viking wears in every cartoon is not a thing any Viking ever wore. There is no evidence for it in the ground. It was largely the invention of a costume designer, Carl Emil Doppler, who dressed the singers for Wagner's Ring Cycle in Germany in 1876. We invented the horns, and we invented the lawless brute wearing them, and both are about as historical as the opera they came from. The reality was a people who rode for days across lava to sit outside in the cold and listen to one man recite the law from memory so that everyone would know the rules they had agreed to live by. They had no cells and no chains. They had something worse. They could take a man in front of the whole nation and simply stop counting him. And 1,000 years later, in a world of prisons and police and law libraries, the punishment that still frightens us most is the one they invented first: to be left completely, permanently alone.